Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Kenney Baden. As you know, we are in Tennessee today. The case of Tennessee versus Eric Boyd, where he is charged of killing, brutally murdering two young people, Shannon Christian and also Chris Newsom. They were both in their 20s. On the stand right now is Gerald Smith. He is a retired crime scene investigator. He is talking about the things found at the houses where both the crimes occurred and where the main ringleader, Mr. Davidson, was found. Let's listen. Okay, so we are bringing the gas can out, and there's a hint here, my two New Jersey guests, Bob Hille, that this is the gas can, must have gas in it, may have been used by Eric Boyd driving this white Sunfire who belonged to Adrian Mathis, and that's why the body of Christopher Newsom was smoldering, correct?
If we're suspecting that, the jury's suspecting that.
We're suspecting and the jury's now. Let's just talk about Christopher Newsom. Okay, this we don't have a shoelace here because both of you guys are wearing loafers at this point. But assume this is a shoelace. He was found with a shoelace, and I'm going to read this. This is just terrible. Tied with a belt around his ankles and a shoelace around his left wrist, right? Kind of like a hog tie, so he can't move. And then he's got his face wrapped with appeared to be a sweatshirt with a gag in his mouth. Again, tied with what would be a shoelace, and they're holding it. Just terrible. And to add that, he's shot 3 times, Mike Koribanics.
The whole thing, and it really hits home. That's why I always like coming here, because you always have props. But props are very effective. I mean, that's painful.
That's terrible.
That's painful. That's a sharp pain. Those are like razor kind of cuts they cause when they're too tight. This is
torture. And then, Bob, the implication is that he's brought to the tracks, wrapped like this, or at least certain time he was wrapped so he couldn't breathe, he was choking, he's hog-tied, and then he's shot in the back of the head, he's shot in his face, he's shot in his neck. I mean, what the jury is going to imagine Chris Newsom and thinking, and then he's burned, and could this man who was on trial sitting at that counsel table, so, looking like he's a lawyer almost, could he have done that horrible act?
That's the question they're being asked to answer.
Oh boy, beyond a reasonable doubt so far?
I don't think so, and I think this is why this lawyer is so effective in the limited cross we've seen is he is trying to bring it all down, because it should be brought down. There's a lot of drama here. There's a lot of horribleness that went on, but these jurors took an oath to remove the emotion and look at the facts, and I think he's doing a very good job of doing that.
Well, let's see what the crime scene forensics, the Lieutenant Gerald Smith, retired now, has to say, tying what evidence he has to Eric Boyd. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Kenney Baden, and we are covering the case of Tennessee versus Eric Boyd, who is on trial for the double homicide, the murder of 2 young people, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom, who were killed in 2007. The question is, did Eric Boyd participate in these murders? He is serving a federal sentence for actually hiding the lead guy. But what I want to talk about a little bit right now is one of the victims. We talked about Christopher Newsom before, and we're going to get back to that, Bob. But Shannon Christian, Mike, she was, and let me just tell you, she was raped vaginally and orally. She was violently sodomized, which means that she probably had a lot of bruising around her genital area. She had bleach poured in her mouth and her vagina in an attempt to secrete the evidence, and yet DNA came through and at least connected 2 terrible people, that is Lamarcus Davidson and Latalvis Davidson Cobbins, okay? Now, when somebody tries to pour bleach to try to hide DNA, that actually infuriates people even more because it made this poor woman suffer even more, right?
Well, it just shows the heinous nature of this crime. I mean, all these people thought about was themselves, and they threw any sort of.
But they thought about cover-up, right?
Yeah,
they thought about rape and then cover-up, right?
And, well, I'm sure we're going to hear in summations about consciousness of guilt, and I think the dollar bill they talked about earlier rolled up is going to show there was some sort of high drug intake at some point in time by all these defendants.
And that's what they had some robbery. But here, she also was then put in a barrel alive. She suffocated. Her cause of death was suffocation, Bob. Hille, you made a point that the .22 that Christopher Newsom was killed with, he was killed with 20, whatever the weapon was, whatever the gun was. We don't know if it's the Sunfire weapon or the Sun weapon that we saw before with the little holster that was found. But you made a point. What was it about torture and a .22 caliber bullet?
Well, because it's such a small caliber, it's likely, now I haven't seen the forensic evidence on that, but it's likely that he didn't die right away from those gunshots, even the one to the head. He knew, by the way he was bound, that these people were going to kill him. He was already suffering terribly, and then he had to feel each one of those rounds.
Well, you know what? This is torture, though. Torture, Mike. This is not just kill. This is torture. If I'm the jury sitting there right now, I can't control myself, even though I don't know the whole picture. As we're sitting here, we're like jurors. Even though I know the picture, I'm furious.
Well, you've got to be furious, because when you said barrel, I mean, it was a garbage can. I mean, these defendants thought of human life as garbage. That's how little regard they had for it. And I think that's very symbolic, and I think the prosecution is going to use that a lot.
Well, you know what? Our expert, our forensic expert, is now on cross-examination in the courtroom. Let's listen to whether or not the cross is effective for Eric Boyd. So, Bob and Mike, what happened here is you had 4 other prior defendants, right, trials, Lamarcus Davidson, Latalvis Davidson, who were convicted of the murder, and George Thomas convicted, he's also apparently going to testify here in this trial, and Vanessa Coleman convicted of some parts of relating to the homicide, the murders of these 2 young people, Shannon and Chris, right? Okay, you got all that, right? Now, all right, she's on the stand now in this trial versus Eric Boyd, and she says, Mike, do you recall saying that you lent your car to anybody? I don't remember. Problem?
Major problem.
For who?
For the defense.
For the defense? Why?
Because she's the most closely related to the defendant. She's his cousin. She seems to now be afraid of him, because I think that's an implication. It's sort of a background noise to this jury is, why did she remember on all those other occasions and not now? And it may not make this defendant look like such a co-counsel in this matter, but make him look like someone who's intimidating, who will put you in fear. And he's doing it without saying a word.
Bob Hille, if she's not going to remember the fact that she previously testified that she lent her car to her cousin who's on trial right now, do you think she's really going to say, he scares me?
No, but I agree with Mike that it's clear from looking at her testimony now, she's got that smug look on her face that she really wants to not cooperate. And she's trying to help the defendant. The jury, I think, is going to conclude that. They're also going to conclude, I think, that those statements she made that she's now trying to disavow, they're going to believe those statements, and they're probably going to even give greater weight to them than they would have if she just said them on the stand herself.
Well, the defense attorney got to question her outside the presence of the jury to try to alleviate, I think, the fears that our 2 legal beagle experts here from New Jersey just said. So let's listen to his cross-examination. So that is the cousin of the person on trial right now who may have the only evidence that connects him to driving the car that had some evidence in it. Bob Hille, the former president of the New Jersey State Bar Association. Tell me this, okay? What did you have for breakfast in, let's say, the year 2007, 2009 on today's date?
Well, I can't tell you that because I don't remember.
You can't tell me, so why are you ragging on the fact that she can't remember what she testified to? And she said the only reason she testified to it, by the way, Mike Koribanics, is that she was prepped by some assistant U.S. attorney who told her, read this on paper.
Well, that's what he's trying to get out in his cross-examination, but she's not listening to her cousin's defense attorney because she's sort of arguing with that, saying, I just don't remember. Now, I don't
well, let me
think
just
that's
go back to Bob. So she said, I don't remember. And he said, well, why did you say it? He said, well, they prepped me and they told me just to say what's on this paper, but that's not really what I really remembered. I don't remember anything, to tell you the truth.
Well, I think what the jury's going to look at there and try and presume, or may presume, is that she's trying to avoid a perjury charge by saying her recollection is no longer good. She's not going to admit that she lied under oath, nor is she going to say something contrary. But for some reason, she believes that her saving grace here is going to say, I just don't remember. And what's interesting is defense counsel's trying to restore her credibility for those inconsistent statements by trying to create suspicion for the police in trying to get someone to answer for this horrible crime.
Well, indeed, Mike Koribanics. Wait, I have a question for you. Okay, my courtroom, okay? Indeed, we now know of a lot of cases of wrongful convictions, and people can believe that, indeed, that there may be a prosecutor who could implant statements that someone should say, right?
You're absolutely right. And there's a technique I believe in, Professor Baden, is that this defense attorney now should really be taking her through all her trial prep. starting from day one. Who was the first member of law enforcement you spoke to? All the way through. And I think that's a way you can deliver to this jury that she may have been manipulated along the way. The problem is, though, here she's not saying I was confused. That when you say I don't remember, and then you have past recorded recollection, legally, that's a problem for the defense.
Well, let's see what happened, because she got to testify some more, this time in front of the jury in Tennessee today in her cousin's trial, whose name is Eric Boyd. There he is. He is on trial for the murder of the 2 young people we discussed earlier. Okay, so this is real life trial. This is a witness for the prosecution who would link Eric Boyd to this white car that another person who worked on the street where the victims, or at least one of the victims, was found in a house. That would be the young woman who just was brutally raped, as you know, Shannon. This car would link to Eric Boyd. And all of a sudden, we have this witness who says, I don't recall, I don't recall, I don't recall. But my Koribanics, the jury heard her testimony anyhow.
Well, this is just horrible for the defense. But what's even a little more surprising to me is, and we're not done, I haven't seen all of this testimony, is I'm surprised the prosecutor is not saying, hasn't met with her between the last trial and now.
Right,
hasn't gotten over
we only have, let's see, 9 years, 10 years, and 12 years from the trials, right?
And we didn't meet. And we didn't discuss this, and you didn't tell us such and such. And even if they don't have a recording of that actual, the interviews pre-trial, I'm sure there was an investigator. You're a former prosecutor. You never talk to a witness without an investigator. Bring them in and say, we just met, or him or her in, we just met 2 weeks ago in the office, and she told us this was all accurate.
Right, right. So I gather they didn't want to be accused of suborning her in any way or pushing her in any way, so they just let her come up there, figuring that she had prior witness statements that she testified to, that she loaned her car the first week in January to her cousin Eric Boyd, which now she says she doesn't remember, and that she reached under the seat and up came a bag of bullets, right? That she eventually threw away because she said she didn't want to be associated with them or some such thing of like that. Right, Bob?
This witness is a problem for both sides because, as Mike said, that would be the way to approach this witness. But I think he's afraid that he doesn't know what she's going to say next because he's trying to clue her in, and she's going in another direction. This idea, too, of the suspicion with the police, I think, is falling flat because she's an interested witness. Had she been an independent witness and said that, then I think that might give some members of the jury that might feel that way about the police something to hang their hat on. But here I don't think so.
Let me just tell both of you a little secret that I kept from you in answering that question. She said that she would not meet with any side before the trial to prepare. So maybe that answers why she is not prepared, because she didn't want to be influenced and she didn't want to be pressured, obviously. We have to take a quick break. Stay with us for the afternoon session on the Law&Crime Network. Mr. J.D. Ford, just doing his job, 12:55 p.m., he finds the next day the body of Chris Newsom, bound, gagged, like we talked about, and shot 3 times in the head. Michael, does he ever recover?
I think these are very powerful witnesses because it shows how these actions of these defendants go beyond just the victims. It affected everybody's life in that community. And that, as a prosecutor, is where you really want to go.
And while this is a case against State versus Eric Boyd in Tennessee, where I was in a case close by, I think that, Bob, Hille, the jurors have to be as affected as we are, as J.D. Ford is still 12 years later, right?
Absolutely. They're going to be affected by this. It's terrible. And as Mike said before, he made a good point. You don't want to emphasize the bad parts of the case, especially when it doesn't target your client directly, so just let it go.
But he's still crying 12 years later. You heard his voice crackling. That's not because of nervousness, that's because of upsetting, right? Well,
that's what was the catalyst for my thought on how much this really is so widespread. It's easier when we're standing here as opposed to being representing a client because you have a little room to see things, right, and you really see it clearer from here. Well, I have to thank both of you. My guests, my New Jersey panel today, that's Mike Koribanics, that's Bob Hille. They have just dissected this case, and a very difficult case, because we always have to remember, we have to remember that this is a trial. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is needed, but we also have to deal with the victims and keep them in our memories. The Daily Debrief, surprise guest, surprise host next. Our own Dan Abrams, the owner of this great network, the Law&Crime Network, will be hosting it. My guests will be staying on. I will see you tomorrow
tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 5. Again, we are the Law and Crime Network. This is the afternoon session tomorrow. State versus Tennessee versus Eric Boyd. I will see you then, and I know you will see me. Dan Abrams next.